Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to speak today on the rather broad topic of challenges and opportunities for global development. Firstly, to say that standard disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation are those of myself and are not necessarily those of the European Medicines Agency or its committees. We've heard already this morning about this concept of the use of a foreign comparator product, and this is probably going to be the major focus of my talk today. And it's just to introduce by saying that it's mandatory within the European Union to have what's referred to as an EU reference product. And this is a medicinal product which has been granted a marketing authorization by a European Union member state or by the Commission on the basis of a complete dossier. In other words, with the submission of quality preclinical and clinical data in accordance with the relevant articles of the European Directive 2001/83. And it's just to note that in an application for a marketing authorization that refers to a generic or a hybrid medicinal product must include demonstration of equivalence. And there really is only one exception to this use of an European Union reference product, and that is if the local product is no longer available. And under these circumstances, an application can be made under an Article 10A, or what is also referred to as a well-established use application. And in these circumstances, comparison with a foreign comparator could be acceptable if that comparator has clinical data for efficacy and safety. I won't go into too much detail on this well-established use application. This is also sometimes referred to as a bibliographical because it's basically the test and the clinical trial results that would usually be required can be replaced by the appropriate scientific literature, provided that the active substances have been in well-established use within the European community for at least 10 years and with a recognized efficacy and level of safety. There are specific criteria for applying under this Article 10A, and basically these relate to well-established use within the claimed therapeutic indication, which takes account of time and also the quantitative aspects of the use of the product, and also the degree of scientific interest and the coherence of scientific assessments, and also needs to be already established a positive benefit risk balance, and studies can only be provided for bridging to support the relevance of the literature. Now, to move on to more detail in terms of generics applications, within the European Union, we don't commonly use the term complex generics in the context of formal applications, but what is generally understood as complex generics, we would consider as hybrid applications under Article 10(3) of the directive. And this is basically cases where a medicinal product does not fall within the definition of a generic as provided elsewhere in the directive. And this is usually related to where bioequivalence cannot be demonstrated through bioavailability studies, or if there are changes in the active substances or the therapeutic indications, strength, form, or route of administration versus the reference product. And in these cases, it is usually expected that the results of the appropriate preclinical tests or clinical trials can be provided. And within the application, applicants have to identify the EU reference product, and this goes into details such as the specific state where the product was sourced from, its name, strength, form, the marketing authorization holder, and when it was first authorized. And all these details have to be provided in relation to what was studied for bioequivalence. And for generic or hybrid applications, no indirect comparison, in other words, demonstration of bioequivalence between European Union and non-EU products, is an acceptable justification for using a bioequivalence study with a non-EU reference product as a surrogate for a bioequivalence study with an EU reference. However, having said that, I want to highlight that there are actually examples, although these are perhaps exceedingly rare, but within hybrid applications, there have been cases where data from studies with non-EU comparator products have been used as supportive. And an example, and the link here is to the public assessment report, but this is for a product called Cuprior. And within that application, a pharmacokinetic study that was used to meet US registration requirements was submitted. And basically, because it was conducted against a US reference product, the data were considered only supportive, but in this regard, they were considered informative for the characterization of the pharmacokinetic behavior. And specifically in this case, it was relating to the demonstration of linearity of pharmacokinetics. So within this particular application, these data were really, although we say supportive, they were important in establishing the linearity and hence the appropriate dosage. So it's perhaps using this example is to give kind of some idea or insight into what might be an area for further research around hybrid applications to consider. And this is this context of studies that might not be directly considered relating to establishing bioequivalence, but they are important for further characterizing the pharmacokinetics of a product, and particularly when compared to the reference product. And as I say, these data may be possible to use or to obtain from what we would call a comparator product. So for the next part of the presentation, I basically want to kind of expand on this concept of, for complex generics or hybrid applications, the idea of having a different form and also a different indication may mean that information is needed on more than just the comparison to the reference medicinal product. And for this particular example I have here today, it's very recently concluded what we call an Article 29.4 or a CHMP referral. And without overly going into the details of this, it is possible within the European Union to have a number of routes to apply for a marketing authorization, not all of which necessarily involve coming through the centralized route via the EMA, but instead it can be through what we call a mutual recognition or decentralized procedures via the member states. And sometimes when there is a disagreement among the member states in relation to these non-centralized applications, where there are scientific issues that need to be concluded on, the member states refer the matter to the CHMP for what we call arbitration, but for, as I say, a scientific conclusion based on the available data. And within this particular example, it concerns a product called Nasolam, which was a nasal spray, and it contains midazolam and is used to stop prolonged acute or sudden convulsive seizures. It was developed as a hybrid medicine. However, the reference medicinal product, Dormicum, is a solution that's given intravenously and is not used to treat prolonged acute convulsive seizures. So the member states involved in the procedure were not able to reach an agreement regarding the use of the medicine for this particular indication, and the matter was referred to CHMP for arbitration last September. And the main grounds for the referral were concerns about the safety and effectiveness of the medicine when used for these acute seizures in the non-hospital setting. And for this particular use, it's just to highlight that the company submitted data for an intrabuccal midazolam solution, which was authorized in the EU as the name Bucalam via hybrid 10.3 application. And effectively within this procedure, Bucalam was used as a comparator product in addition to the use of the EU reference Dormicum. So, among other issues, the CHMP asked the applicant to address the bridging of data on efficacy and safety between the Nasolam and the Bucalam in view of non-similar exposure profiles which were demonstrated in the submitted pharmacokinetic data. These included difference in Cmax, differences in exposure, and also there was a question around underdosing in heavier subjects due to decreasing exposure with increasing body weight. And to highlight in the context of a kind of areas for further research and also the use of modeling and simulation to support applications, I would like to highlight that for the anti-epileptic indication, there was submitted 8 in silico PK/PD simulation analysis using POP-PK and POP-PK/PD models, and these were in adults, in pediatric patients, in the elderly, and in special populations. And the simulations were performed using the intravenous midazolam administered intrabuccally. And so this is a good example of the use of such data to support indications in this case. And data from the Bucalam public assessment report was used to construct the models for simulations. And within the procedure, the applicant also provided literature data to further support the use in adults of this anti-convulsive seizures indication. So the CHMP considered the available data and concluded that these data supported the use of intranasal midazolam in the treatment of seizures. And it was concluded that the benefits outweigh the risks in this seizure indication, and therefore a marketing authorization should be granted in all concerned member states. And there was also further recommendations that the proposed product information should be amended to reflect the available data. For example, these changes related to dosing for older patients and also further instructions for carers on the use of a second dose when treating seizures. So hopefully this example is interesting on a number of levels uh, relating to how the kind of the the data to support a particular application may be drawn from multiple sources, and as I've said, may not just use data referring to the reference product, but also to an additional comparator product. And perhaps to be a bit more regulatory about it, the notice to applicants is the procedural and guidance from the European Commission in terms of applications within the EU. And specifically within this section I have here, it states that for a product which has been approved as a hybrid application, if subsequent applications are submitted for a different product, but which refers to data supporting the same reference product, the data that was used to support what we call here the product B can also be referred to under certain circumstances to support this, what we would call product C. So it's a little bit, seems complicated here, but basically the idea is that you can again use information that's submitted for one hybrid product to support another hybrid product, but basically they would have to refer back to the same reference product. So to summarize, basically the use of an EU reference product is mandatory, and the use of a foreign comparator is only in a particular setting for well-established use. However, for hybrid or complex generic applications, PK data with a non-EU comparator could be used as supportive. And again, it's just this concept that for such applications, a kind of a body of evidence approach with data from multiple sources is perhaps something that we will see more of. And to remind in terms of what data might be used to support such a totality of evidence approach, it is recommended that scientific advice is sought early in development. And while regulatory questions as such are out of the scope of EMA scientific advice, we would tend not to deal with questions that directly ask around the legal basis. However, questions relating to scientific aspects of the use of a comparator would be considered within scope. And again, to kind of emphasize the pilot parallel scientific advice that is ongoing with the FDA and for which we have already heard in some detail or will hear more of shortly. And with that, I would like to conclude and can take questions in the panel discussion later. Thank you.